Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Group 3 and we are going to report our presentation about Romanticism, Art Deco, and Art Nouveau. Here we have the members and their respective topics to present. For Romanticism, we have Jerain, and it's me. Art Nouveau for Andre Daniel, and Art Deco for Vince. Now we will start with Romanticism. So, what is Romanticism? Romanticism was an artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement that originated in Europe towards the end of the 18th century. There is no specific year to when Romanticism started and ended. Some say it's 1770, some say it's around 1800s. Maybe you might get confused between Romanticism because I myself also got confused between the two. They are different in terms of meaning. When we say romanticism with the small r, it is about being readily demonstrating feelings of love. It is the romantic that we know of today. But with the romanticism with the big R, it talks about the art movement that we are tackling today. In Romanticism, the Romantics emphasize with their emotions the individual, the subjective, the irrational, the imaginative, the personal, the spontaneous, the visionary, and the specially beauty of nature. Artists this era, or the Romantics we call, they express their deepest beliefs. They have deepened appreciation with their individualities. In this era, they make art about them wanting freedom because Romantic movement was the reaction or revolt against the Enlightenment, American Revolution, French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. The Romanticism is like a rebellion for these events. It was also said that Romanticism happened back then because most artists cannot do what they want with their artwork. In Romanticism, they started using their imaginations for their artworks. These big events that happened, they play a huge role with the birth of the Romanticism. This period provoked the Romanticism to be born as they didn't like their Enlightenment values of progress and rationality. Here, let's have a small overview of the revolutions that made the Romanticism. First is the Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Reason, was an intellectual and cultural movement in the 18th century that emphasized reason over superstition, science over blind faith. The study and celebration of reason, the power by which humans understand the universe and improve their own condition, were central to the Enlightenment ideology. Knowledge, freedom, and happiness were thought to be the ideals of rational humanity. This image here is the 18 key thinkers of the Age of Enlightenment. They were the leaders, or they called themselves philosophers. They applied science and reason to society to benefit society. Second is the American Revolution. Was sparked by colonial resistance to British attempts to exert greater authority over the colonies and force them to compensate the crown for its defense during the French and Indian War. The war started after more than a decade of growing hatred between the British crown and a substantial and important portion of the British North American colonies, which was triggered by British attempts to impose greater control over colonial affairs after years of foreign rule. Next revolution is the French Revolution. It was a period of radical political and societal change in France that began with the Estates General of 1789 and ended with the formation of French consulate in November 1799. The upheaval was caused by widespread discontent with the French monarchy and the poor economic policies of King Louis XVI, who met his death by guillotine as did his wife Marie Antoinette. This image here was the painting of Marie Antoinette's execution by the guillotine. The Industrial Revolution was the transition to new manufacturing processes in Great Britain, continental Europe, and the United States, in the period from about 1760 to sometime between 1820 and 1840. This was the time when machines replaced people. So it has been 40 years of Industrial Revolution when Romanticism started. Although the Industrial Revolution have helped and minimized people's work, although we are getting our clothes cheaper, although goods and services are being distributed more efficiently, it's ugly. That is what the Romantics thought about the Industrial Revolution, as beside them from destroying the nature and the environment, it also started capitalism and child labors, and they didn't like that. I have here a list of what the Romantics value. There are more, but this is like the main values they put focus on. First is nature. The Romantics would rather look at the waterfall than look at the big dirty city, as they value nature a lot. Nature is one of the things that is greatly connected to Romanticism, as it was also part of their main inspirations. Next would be childhood. They believe that children should enjoy their time before they encounter all the problems of adult life. They believe that children are innocent and carefree. Next is emotion. They believe that there is no need of a reason to feel and express emotions. That's why they do not like the Enlightenment, as the Enlightenment are full of reasons. Religion. The Romantics like religion. They like something that cannot be understood. This is something also about the Enlightenment, because Enlightenment preferred science over religion. Next is imagination. Imagination is a factor of how we perceive reality, as our mind attempt to process and to understand the sensory data of the world around us. For the Romantics, imagination was also their primary vehicle for the creation of their art. Individuality. There was an emphasis on the importance of individual. The Romantics renounced the rationalism and order associated with the preceding Enlightenment era, stressing the importance of expressing authentic personal feelings. With all of that being said, let us go to the famous artists and their works in the Romantic period. Let us start with music. Music throughout the Romantic period had its own shape and versatility. There are also dramatic pitch and dynamics contrast. Composers of the Romantic era considered music as the way of personal and emotional expression as its foundation. They believed that the music was the most capable art form for expressing the complete range of human emotion. As a result, Romantic composers expanded the emotional content of their works. Music was supposed to connect with the audience, frequently in the form of narrative that presented different stories. Later, we will play a music for each of the artists that each of the composers that I will show, and we are going to hear how beautiful and emotional their style of music is. First, we have Franz Liszt. He was born in October 1811. He was a Hungarian composer, pianist, and a teacher of the Romantic era. Liszt gained renown in Europe during the early 19th century for his virtuoso skill as a pianist. Let's listen to one of his composed music for 1 minute. Niccolò Paganini was an Italian violinist and composer. He was the most celebrated violin virtuoso of his time and left his mark as one of the pillars of modern violin technique. Here is the thing. Back then, Paganini was known by the name of the devil's violinist just because he was really amazing. He was particularly known for performing recitals without sheet music, memorizing everything instead, and could play up to 12 notes per second. And here is a piece from Niccolò Paganini. Frédéric François Chopin was a Polish composer and virtuoso pianist of the Romantic period who wrote primarily for solo piano. He has maintained worldwide renown as a leading musician of his era, one whose poetic genius was based on a professional technique that was with equal in his generation. Here is a piece from Frédéric François Chopin. Now we will go ahead for the literature and the Romantics period. For now, I will share famous works that we all probably know. So, for the Romantics, the purpose of literature was not to describe the world as it was, but rather as how it could be. So, this one is very popular. It's Les Miserables. I think I'm pronouncing it wrong, but I hope I am right. It's a French historical novel by Victor Hugo. It was first published in 1862. It is considered as one of the greatest novels of the 19th century. It was set in 19th century France. Les Miserables follows the life of Jean Valjean, an ex-convict who seeks redemption despite being haunted for decades by his rival and ex-guard Javert after breaking parole. As you all may know, Les Miserables is one popular novel as it was made into movies and musical stage plays. Here is another popular novel that we know today as a Disney movie is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I believe that this story was also told in Filipino book in our high school. The Hunchback of Notre Dame was also written by the author of Les Miserables, which is Victor Hugo. The novel has been described as a key text in French literature and has been adapted for film over a dozen times, as well as numerous television and stage adaptations, including a silent film. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is set in Paris during 15th century. The story centers on Quasimodo, the deformed bell ringer of Notre Dame Cathedral, and his unrequited love for the beautiful dancer La Esmeralda. Esmeralda, born Agnes, is perceived to be a French Roma girl. These novels, they are seem gloomy, but they are mystical and passionate. Like romantic paintings, they evoke passion on their audience. Now we go with the paintings during the Romanticism period. So, romantic art focused on emotions, feelings, and moods of all kinds, including spirituality, imagination, mystery, and fervor. The subject matter varied widely, including landscapes, religion, revolution, and peaceful beauty. For the first painting, we have here The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. This painting is the face of Romanticism, as it is the most famous painting in the Romantic period. If you search Romanticism, this painting will be the first to be shown. Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog is a painting by German Romantic artist Caspar David Friedrich from 1818. It depicts a man standing on a rocky cliff's edge with his back on the viewer, gazing out over a landscape covered in thick sea of fog through which other ridges, trees, and mountains pierce, and which stretches out into the distance indefinitely. This painting was also said that it means that the guy is going to a really high place and looking forward to go to see God. It is also regarded as one of the greatest works of Romanticism and one of its most iconic works. The landscape is commonly thought to invoke the sublime, and painting has been widely understood as an icon of self-reflection or contemplation of life's path. For the third painting, we have here the Swiss English painter Henry Fuseli painting. Um, it chose to depict darker irrational forces in his famous painting, The Nightmare. In Fuseli's startling composition, a woman wearing in white light stretches across a bed, her arms, neck, and head hanging off the end of the mattress. An ape-like figure crouches on her chest while a horse with glowing eyes and flared nostrils emerges from the shadowy background. The figure that sits upon on the woman's chest is often described as an imp or an incubus. The type of spirit or a demon said to lie atop people on their sleep or even to have sexual intercourse with sleeping women. This painting is suggestive but not explicit, leaving open the possibility that the woman is simply dreaming. Yet her dreams appear to take frightening physical form in shapes of the incubus and the horse. For the third painting, we have here Saturn Devouring His Son by Spanish artist Francisco Goya. It depicts the Greek myth of the Titan Cronus eating one of his offspring after Gaia foretold a prophecy, fearing that he would be overthrown by one of his children, and so he ate these children upon their birth. Fun fact that this painting was not painted on a canvas, it was painted with his murals in his dining room, and then when it was discovered, and then they transferred it onto a canvas. Have I mentioned earlier that romantics love nature? They love nature, especially if you put castles on top of grass. For Romanticism architecture, they were inspired by old medieval and Gothic revival architecture. Gothic architecture was said to die or to be gone by the 16th century. When the Romanticism started, they used the Gothic architecture and it led to the Gothic revival architecture that they have now. Romanticism expressed itself in architecture primarily through imitations of older architectural styles. Medieval Gothic architecture appealed to be the Romantic imagination in England and Germany, and this renewed interest led to the Gothic revival. So, Romanticism in architecture is an umbrella term that covers many of the European 19th century revivalist and Eastern influence styles. Neoclassical, Greek revival, Gothic revival, Baroque revival, Romanesque revival, and Indo-Saracenic are some examples. In short, there is no proper architectural style for Romanticism. Although we have here the four major themes that they have in their architectural style, the four major themes that Romantics like to put in their architecture are emotion, imagination, nature, and social class. Starting off with this very beautiful castle, the Neuschwanstein Castle can be easily described as the epitome of famous Romantic buildings, constructed majestically on top of a hill in southern Bavaria, Germany. It overlooks that plains north of the Alps mountain range. This castle was commissioned by King Ludwig II of Bavaria. It was dedicated to his idol, German composer Richard Wagner. Its architectural design is especially picturesque, making it one of the most famous castles in Europe. The castle was built on 19th century where castles are not really needed or the type of place people want at this time, but King Ludwig II said he wanted one. Also, even this was a castle, it has its own technology inside and it's not like those very old living styles of castles. If you think you've seen this castle before, well, you probably did because this Neuschwanstein Castle is the inspiration for Cinderella's castle, the Disney princess. Next is the Sacré-Cœur. It's probably wrong, but please deal with it. It's officially known as the Basilica of the Sacred Heart of Paris. Located on top of the Montmartre Hill, it's one of the most amazing churches you'll ever come across and one of the most outstanding buildings in Paris. This is a reference to the heart of Jesus, which is the representation of his divine love for humanity. This church is the second most famous tourist spot in Paris next to, the Eiffel Tower. The Sacré-Cœur now stands on top of the hill of Montmartre, but before its construction, this place was already a place of worship. Indeed, paganism used to be practiced and Gallo-Roman temples were once built there in dedication to Mercury and Mars. Being the highest point of the city, this place has always been chosen by the believers due to the feeling of being closer to the sky, which holds the idea of being closer to God, to heaven, and forgiveness in Catholicism. Lastly is this Cologne Cathedral is a Catholic cathedral in Cologne, North Rhine-Westphalia. In Germany, it is the seat of the Archbishop of Cologne and the administration of the Archdiocese of Cologne. It is a renowned monument of German Catholicism and Gothic architecture and was declared a World Heritage Site in 1996. The fascinating thing about this cathedral is that it began its construction way back in 1248 and it was never finished. They were only able to finish the cathedral during the Romantic era on 1880. That's hundreds of years, huh? Again, Romanticism is an intellectual art movement where the rise of ideas came to be. The Romantics used imagination, emotion, and nature mostly in their artworks, may it be painting, literature, music, or in architecture. They like to express dramatic emotions of their feelings to their works. That is all about Romanticism. Next, we go ahead to Art Nouveau, which will be discussed by Andre. Thank you.